I'd like to call this village board meeting to order. It's 7:43. Has this meeting been publicly noticed?
The meeting has been posted and noticed according to law.
Thank you. All trustees are present. Our first special order of business tonight is to consider resolution 29-26, confirming obligations to contribute to North Shore Fire Department's budget to pay debt service on bonds issued by the Village of Whitefish Bay on behalf of the North Shore Fire Department. This will be a roll call vote. With the record reference. Oh, Chief. Let's in the back. Come on up. Give us a short synopsis.
So there's two items. You're taking up A. B is somewhat related to this item, so do you want me to speak on all of them now, or? Sure. Okay. So A is relating to the remodel project, the fire station in Whitefish Bay. That building is a, we've actually gone to bid twice on this project. The second time the bids came back. Recently the lowest bidder is within the ballpark of what we had expected. This project's been in the works for several years, so those estimates, just with time, have also had to increase to stay with time because of construction costs and everything. But the fire department board did vote to accept the low bidder for the project, which is a majority of the project. Cost, there is some cost for furniture and other things in there that will be handled internally on our own rather than have a contractor do that, just to save some money, do it in-house. So the Village of Whitefish Bay, as I said earlier, they own the building. About 4 years ago now, when we started talking about this project with Whitefish Bay, they indicated they wanted to partner with this project. We sat down and looked at the scope of the work, which has generally remained the same throughout the time that it's taken to get to this point. To split the costs out between the costs that were responsible of the owner of the building, based on how the fire service agreement is written, and then as the tenant, our costs. Whitefish Bay had previously, in the last couple of years, put a fair amount of money into the building, put in new roof, new windows, new air conditioning, new heat. So they had spent a fair amount of money prior to this. So the cost split that was agreed to at the time was 70% fire department, 30% the village. So the cost split the total project, I believe, came up to $941,000. So the cost was split 70% North Shore Fire, 30% Village of Whitefish Bay. Village of Whitefish Bay will also pay their 17% of the 70% of their membership cost.
And Chief, is that the lowest bid you're talking about, that 900? And what was the original estimate?
So the original estimate we were in somewhere in the 800,000 range. Let me get to the right page of my packet here.
Okay, and we went out to bid within a year period. I mean, it was very, very close to each other.
Yeah, the first bidding, the low bidder was over $1 million when we bid in July of 2018. So this bid, actually their bid, that's the 941 is total cost. The construction bid is 819, I think, $819,600.
Did you change the scope in between?
Yeah. We narrowed the scope a little bit, tried to use some, we changed architects, so we had different engineers that work on the project. In the end, I think we're getting a fairly similar product, and we just went about the project differently, which I think that helped with the bidding, and then also the timing of the bidding. Last year we did this right in late spring into the summer, and construction season last year was very competitive, and I think the contractors had most of their work already scheduled at that point and knew that they were probably going to premium bid this project because they didn't necessarily need to fill their schedule as bad as they do now. In this project, the bidding allows them to pick the work period with a restriction of time that they have to complete it once they start, so it's a lot more flexible for them.
And my only other question, I had mentioned it to Rebecca, and I don't know what the response was, but Whitefish Bay is going to bond for the North Shore Fire, on the North Shore Fire Department's behalf for the Shorewood rehab. And originally, when we talked about it, it was going to be together.
Right.
And I know the timelines are different, but now that it's not together, there's going to be extra bonding costs. Are they still willing to do that, and what's their timeline for that?
Yeah, so they had offered initially up to $4 million in capacity bonding. So this project would take, this is really out of that bond, our share will be at $700-ish, some thousand dollars, because it's 70% of the cost, and then they're going to get their money too. They've decided to, just based on timing, issue separate bonds from their own municipal bonds for other projects they have going, so that's changed. Just in the last 3 weeks, that's changed based on their timing. So they're going to issue separate bonds for this. They're still willing to do additional bonding if we have another project coming up to $4 million. I think based on the timing of that, there could be some flexibility even from there with them, just based on the year that's what will happen in. But if not, if we may have to seek another municipality to do that. We don't have the authority, because we're not a taxing entity, to issue general obligation bonds, which generally gives your best interest rates. We could do revenue bonds or some other things, but the interest rates are adverse to that. We can do general obligation is much better. So the action in front of you tonight, action A, is this is the Village of Shorewood saying to Whitefish Bay, we will pay you back our share of the project. So the Village of Shorewood's project, so they can go sell the bond, their bonds on March 22nd, but they need the assurance before they go to sale that the 7 municipalities, including themselves, will pay themselves back before they can put it out on the street for sale on March 22nd. So that is the initial.
Through a regular contribution, through ongoing capital contribution?
Right. So that, the portions, the estimated amounts were put together by community at this point for the next, there are estimates for 2 reasons. One is we haven't sold, or Whitefish Bay hasn't sold the bonds, so we don't know what the interest rates are going to sell at, and so hence you don't know what your payments are going to be exactly. Ellers put some estimates in there, and then also the contribution to the cost based on the fire service agreement between the 7 municipalities is based on the formula, in effect, the year that the payment's made. So that formula changes every 5 years and then rolls for 5 years. So right now we only have solid contribution percentages by community through 2020. So after that, I don't know what they're all going to be. We have a general expectation that they don't move much, but they are not locked in based on how the formula is.
But aren't we going to forward, aren't we going to change, we requested that we change that in the future?
So we've asked for an opinion from our auditors, Baker Tilly, to look at, there was a question raised by the Village of Shorewood about how that's documented in audits and then how that is booked, so to speak. So we're waiting for a reply. We have they're putting together a reply for us.
So it could change.
I move to approve Resolution 2019-06, confirming obligation to contribute to North Shore Fire Department's budget to pay debt service on bonds issued by the Village of Whitefish Bay on behalf of the North Shore Fire Department.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Second by Trustee Bachhorst. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those,
Trustee Warren.
Aye.
Trustee Amenta.
Aye.
Trustee McKay. Aye. Trustee Bachhorst.
Yes.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Carpenter.
Aye.
President Rosick.
Yes. Thank you. 7 votes. Okay. The next is, let me just announce it and we can
Sure.
continue on. So, where is it? Oh, here we go. 4B, consider resolution 2019-07 approving the single or multi-year capital budget to remodel Whitefish Bay Fire Station in 2019. This will be a roll call vote.
So this is the authorizing resolution to actually spend the money to pay for the project. So how the agreement is written, we need authorization to pay for the project.
I'll move to approve resolution 2019-07, approving the single and multi-year capital budget to remodel the Whitefish Bay Fire Station for 2019.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those, roll call.
Trustee Mentor.
Aye.
Trustee Bachman.
Yes.
Trustee Carpenter.
Aye.
Trustee Martin.
Aye.
Trustee McKay.
Aye.
Trustee Warren.
Aye.
President Rosen.
Yes. Vote carries 7-0. Thank you, Chief. Are we keeping Chief around?
Yes.
Oh, no,
I have to,
Okay.
D at least. looks like.
So we're down to C, right? Consider resolution 2019-08, supporting a change in the state of Wisconsin statutes exempting tax levy authorized under state statute 66.06023H2 for joint fire department be excluded from the calculation determining eligibility for qualification for the expenditure restraint program under state statute 79052. This will be a roll call vote. Chief?
Okay, so how the North Shore Fire Service Agreement is written is that annual budget increases can only exceed CPI plus 0.5%. So that is at times a challenge based on what the CPI is. That's generally when we've had years where that's a challenge. So if your CPI is 0, that is a pretty significant challenge, especially if you have labor contracts that are awarded somewhere in the range of 2 to 2.5% on average. So 80 to 90% of our costs are labor related, so that drives up our costs. And what we experienced, the board did a long-range financial plan, finished that about a year and a half ago or a year ago, is that if you don't keep up with the labor contract settlements on your costs, you've had to reduce staff and services throughout those times if you don't do that. So the Wisconsin state statutes in 2006 added a authorization for joint fire departments, which we are lead statute as, to exceed the levy limit, or the municipalities that contribute to us to exceed the levy limit if the amount is no more than CPI plus 2%, so there's a little bit of a difference how it's worded, and that allows you as a municipality to exempt our increase from your levy limit worksheet. So that when you submit your levy limit worksheet, there's a line that says joint fire department charges, and then you can put that on there, and that gets subtracted out of what your limit is. What we have found is there, even though that was done to benefit communities that have agreed to work together, the expenditure restraint program, which is I guess I'll call it a program it's like a grant program that the state provides funding to municipalities that limit their increase in their expenditures year over year, that they get, I guess grant money is what I'm going to call it, and then in Shorewood and a couple other communities, it's upwards of $300,000 to $400,000 a year. So the problem we found was in communities that may exceed their levy limit, you may exceed your levy limit by, let's say, $10,000, but the penalty on the back end is you lose your $300,000 or $400,000 from the state. So municipalities really weren't, it was a nonsensical move to do this, even though the legislation was in the statute. So we had started about a year and a half ago working to try to get something in the statutes that would allow that amount to be, the same amount to be exceeded from the calculation that determines whether or not you qualify for expenditure restraint. So in other words, it's not a penalty. We had worked through leadership at the state, but as you know, in November, the leadership, there's some changes to leadership, so we sort of started over again in November. We had the support of leading municipalities with this and a couple other issues. And the ICC. And it was mentioned several times, Governor Evers at the ICC, Senator Bloss, it was discussed with him. Governor Evers did put it in his budget proposal that came out last week. So it's in there. Now, what happens to that budget proposal is yet to be seen, and who knows what will be made out of that entire document. But the Fire Department Board did pass a similar resolution to what you have here in front of you tonight to basically say they support this legislation. So the municipalities, several of the member municipalities are taking it up. What you have, that information is all going to be forwarded to our local legislators, hopefully later this week, as I now start to try to keep the political support to keep this in whatever version of the state budget that ends up in July, or whenever they decide to pass it.
Thank you. Trustee Bachos.
I'm going to make a motion.
Yes.
Okay. To consider resolution 2019-08 supporting a change in the state of Wisconsin statute exempting tax levy authorized under state statute 66.0602. 3H2 for joint fire department be excluded from the calculation determining eligibility for qualification for the expenditure restraint program under state statute 79.052.
Get that one.
Huh?
I'll second that.
We got a motion, a second. So this is very similar to what we just discussed in committee, where it's the municipalities getting together. You don't have a lot of power to do anything right this minute, but by passing up some resolutions, or it shows and indicates to the state that this is necessary. So that's number one. And number two, just for information purposes, at ICC last week, or last 2 weeks ago, beyond this, Senator Voss came to talk to us, and he asked for a proposal of 3 other shared services, or 3 ways that the state can incentivize shared services similar to this, and so I'll be putting that memo together today,
Yeah.
tonight.
Easier to pick up
But I think he was, people are getting more open to at the state level.